Welcome back. Great work. Let's see how you can solve this challenge. I have two options for you. Let's start with the first one. The first thing that we have to do is to define two variables, my list and factor. My list is a list that contains the elements that we are going to multiply by the factor. In this case, it's 3, 4, 5, 6, like in the sample table that you had in the problem description. We're going to multiply that by a factor of 2, each one of them. And how do we do that? Well, we use a for loop in this first option. We write the loop variable, which is I, and then we write range, passing the length of the list as the argument. And why do we do that? Well, because we need to use the value of I as the index to access or modify the elements of the list. This is going to return a sequence that will go from 0 up to the last index in the list, which in this case is going to be 3. 0, 1, 2, and 3 are the corresponding indices, and that is the sequence of integers that this call to range will return when we pass the length of the list as the argument. Then when we assign that value to I, we need to use it inside the loop. And how do we use it? We say that we want to take the list, my list, and for the element that index I, we want to multiply that value by the factor and assign the result. Okay, so we're basically just multiplying each element by the factor and replacing the value at that index with the result of the multiplication. That is what we're doing in this loop right here. And then we are going to print the list after modifying it. Since lists are mutable, we can do that. We can mutate them and change their values at specific indices. Let's save the file and run the code to see how it works. You can see this as the output. We have 6, 8, 10, and 12 as the elements of the list. But the original list contained the elements 3, 4, 5, and 6. You can see that all the items were multiplied by 2 individually, and that is the new resulting list. Great, so now you've seen the first option. Let's go to our second option. Let me comment this out and let's see what we have right here. We still have our two variables definitions. But now in our loop, we see something a little bit different. And this is a great tool that you definitely need to learn if you want to work with Python. It's the enumerate function. The enumerate function is going to return the corresponding index and the element located at that index for the sequence, for the list in this case. What is enumerate going to return? Let's see. Enumerate of my list, in this case, we have the list right here with the elements 3, 4, 5, and 6, is going to return a sequence. And that sequence, we can represent it as a list. It's not actually a list, but we can represent it as a list for illustration purposes. That sequence is going to have tuples. And each tuple is going to contain two values, the index of the element and the element itself. The element 3, the number 3, is located at index 0 of the list. So we are going to get 1 and 4 because the element 4 is at index 1, and then we're going to get 2 and 5, and 3 and 6. That is a sequence returned by enumerate for this particular list. Indices first, and then we see the corresponding elements. And what are we going to do with this sequence? We're going to assign each one of those values to individual loop variables. And that is why we have two loop variables right here, I and elem. I is going to take the value of the index of the corresponding tuple. In the first iteration, I will be 0. In the second iteration, it will be 1, then 2, and 3. The value of I will correspond to the first element because it's the first variable, and then the value of elem, if we can assign any name to the loop variables, is going to be the element at the list. It's going to be the second element in each tuple. After we set this up to get the index of the element and the corresponding element in the list, then we can work with them in our code, one per iteration. What are we going to do? Well, we are going to take the index and we are going to use it to modify the element. We say, take the element at the current index, multiply it by the factor, which is 2, and then assign the result to the element at that particular index. We are modifying the list, we're modifying the element at the index I. For example, in the first iteration, the value of I will be 0 here. So we're going to take the index 0 of my list, and we are going to assign this result to that index. The value of elem will be 3, because that is the value that corresponds to index 0. For the second iteration, the value of I will be updated to 1. So we are going to take the value at that index, which is 4 in this variable, we multiply by the factor, and then we replace the value at index 1 with the result, and so on. And that is basically how enumerating works. We get the index and its corresponding element, and we can use them simultaneously in every iteration. After this, we just print the list and we will get the same output. Let me comment our previous solution so you can see the output when we run this second alternative, like this. You can see that the output is 6, 8, 10, and 12 in a list. And this is the original list, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Each one of the elements was multiplied by 2. And this is the new version of the new value of the list. Great, so now you know how to solve this coding challenge with these two alternatives. Enumerate is an awesome tool that you can use to write more concise Python loops whenever you need to work with the indices and their corresponding elements.